especially among tenors. One singer described the extreme version of this as Kermity. Even through chatting with tenors, I noticed that they tended to speak with a higher resonance voice. The tenors of King's and St. John's, the all-male choirs, do not have an easy job. These men have to work towards a very unique kind of blend, since there are always only 14 choral scholars against over 20 trebles. A tenor from King's expressed his frustration. He said he hates the way he has to sing because there aren't enough altos to balance out. Countertenors, who sing alto in these choirs, are a rarity. His sound is therefore never fully supported or on the voice. Justin Lavender, the vocal trainer at King's, has the philosophy that if he teaches solid bel canto technique, his singers can learn to back off and not strain their mechanism in choral singing. I was able to observe a few of Lavender's lessons, and he encourages the use of the entire body to sing, not just the throat. He explained to me that this was so important because at sight, technique goes out the window. These men do so much sight reading of pieces that they sing for daily services, they do not they do not have much time to think about incorporating proper technique. David Lowe's philosophy is similar to Lavender's. Excuse me again. The St. John's vocal trainer doesn't ask his singers to compromise technique. To achieve perfect blend, but rather uses the stage from ages 18 to 22 to teach the choral scholars healthy singing. Sorry everyone, I'm getting over a cough. Excuse me. He also ensures that his students are familiar with the mechanism where resonance is found. But he and Nethsingha encourage more of a full-throated sound from the men at St. John's. Commonly referred to as the Gents after their close harmony group name, the Gentlemen of St. John's, they are given free rein in the back row. Nethsingha tries to have a choir in which everyone is singing like soloists, rather than having to shave bits off their voices in order to conform. According to a choral scholar from St. John's, if the tenor section were sounding too loud, Nethsingha would ask a tenor to switch to alto before he asked the tenors to back off. This is an example of the Jonian tradition of encouraging proper technique. According to Robinson, young men feel they're allowed to sing at John's. I think every choir director would like to say that they don't ask singers to compromise their technique in choir, but there is only so much technique one can hold on to while maintaining a desired blend of balance. It's a fine line. At the root of the English choral tone is the treble voice. As the extent of polyphonic music increased in the 15th century Anglican tradition, boys became more important as singers, and their musical potential was newly realized. As a result, they became members of new types of choir formations and major participants in polyphonic repertory of the late 15th and 16th centuries. Cambridge is one of the few collegiate foundations that survived the disruption of the Reformation, and the choirs of King's and St. John's colleges have maintained continuous singing in services since even before the Reformation over 500 years ago. Despite the yearly cycle of new singers and changing music directors every few decades, the sounds of these choirs of men and boys have been cultivated for hundreds of years. If you'll excuse me for just 2 minutes, I'll be right back. observed a chorister rehearsal at King's. King's and St. John's both have college boarding schools just down the road, where the choristers rehearse in the mornings and attend classes each day. On the second day of my trip, I walked across the River Cam to the King's College School. Of course, it was raining, and I got lost a couple of times, but I eventually made it. On my way to the rehearsal room after obtaining my visitor name tag, I happened to bump into Cleobury and one of his choral scholars, which would be the equivalent of a graduate assistant here. I followed them up to the rehearsal room, a big, brightly lit space with a semicircle of tall benches and wooden stands for music. Along the hallway outside the room, King's records of the past lined the walls, plastered with the names of former directors of music Boris Ord, David Wilcox, and the current Stephen Cleobury. Names that resonate with choral scholars around the world. The boys were so incredibly well behaved and dressed in uniform with purple cardigans. Before rehearsal, the boys practiced their major instruments independently, ranging from guitar to violin. At St. John's College School, the routine is the same, but the rehearsal room there has a log cabin kind of feel. It is circular, with the same bench configuration, but the floors and walls are made of a beautifully glossed golden wood. You enter from a courtyard containing 2 rows of practice rooms. One day, when I made it to St. John's chorister rehearsal a little early, Andrew Nethsingha told me to wait in the rehearsal room where an 8-year-old probationer named Blake was practicing a Bach convention. His piano playing put mine to shame, but I enjoyed listening to him practice and making small talk. Hopefully my joking about how much better he is at playing piano than me made his practice time a little more fun. During the rehearsals, though, it was easy to tell that the choristers at both schools were confused at my presence, being used to singing only with men and to having close rehearsals. I definitely got a few funny looks, but at least Blake smiled at me in the pew during the procession and the St. John's Evensong that night, which affirmed that we were indeed friends. Another one of my favorite moments was waiting in line for a King's Evensong with hundreds of other tourists and spotting the choristers walking single file behind their teacher towards the chapel for Evensong, donning their dress uniforms, about which they complained of the stiff collar, and top hats, although it wasn't snowing in this picture. A chorister tradition that has continued for many years at King's. Despite being such similar choirs in formation and age, I noticed a distinct difference between the King's and St. John's sounds. At the King's rehearsal, I found the tone produced by the trebles as flute-like. Filled with breath and headspace, this sound was pure and well blended. At St. John's, I noticed more individuality in the sound. It was much easier to pick out individual notes or individual voices in the treble rehearsals, though not as much with the addition of the men's voices. John's trebles tended to sound more focused and piercing. Through a conversation with Andrew Nethsingha, the current director at St. John's, I learned that the differences I heard actually began with George Guest, director of the St. John's Choir from 1951 to 1991. He used to be adamant that boys should never sound breathy, and he is accredited to the so-called continental treble sound. His theory was that a boy has 2 voices, a flute tone and an oboe tone, and both should be developed. His 2 biggest influences were Boris Ord and George Malcolm. Malcolm was the director of the Westminster Cathedral Choir in Guest's time, and he was known for producing a sound that was abrasive, cutting, and the polar opposite of how King sounded. This new continental sound was based on the sound of German boys' choirs and other choirs on the continent. In those days, English cathedral choirs tended to sound more traditional like King's, with an emphasis on the oo vowel, a relatively small volume of sound and more head voice in the mix. Guest succeeded at taking inspiration from Westminster and the German boys' choirs and including that in the sound he wanted from his choir, along with other English influences. The vibrato was distinctive, as well as phrasing, and an emphasis on expression rather than total perfection. This is true today, as all of the men at St. John's tended to sing more freely than the men at King's. I asked Nethsingha more about these differences today. He said it is quite possible that Stephen Cleobury, the current director of King's College Choir, was just as much influenced by Guest as he was, and that the King's sound is very different now than it was in the 60s. About the focused quality of the John's trebles, Nethsingha commented, "I suppose I like to try and encourage a richness of the sound, and to try to teach boys not to sing in a breathy way." He said that he tries to have a choir in which everyone is singing properly, like soloists, rather than one in which everyone has to shave bits off their voices in order to conform. Although the choirs surely do not sound just as they did in the 60s and 70s, it is a testament to the importance that is placed on maintaining choral tradition in England that these differences in the King's and Jonian approach to sound can still be heard today. Although Nethsingha does not still use the term continental, He strives to carry on Guest's legacy. Quote, I sat there every day and watched what Guest did, learning what to do, learning what not to do. He was very kind to me and gave me a huge number of opportunities, end quote. As for how Guest has influenced Nethsingha's direction for the choir today, he commented, I like very much for people who knew the choir in the 70s to come along and think that they can hear some of those characteristics in current boys. That's what I'm aiming to do. I selected this next piece because it so purely and beautifully showcases the exposed treble voice, still requiring a good bit of control and support. I hope you enjoy it as much as we've enjoyed singing it. befriended one of the choral scholars at King's, Rob, who accompanied me to Trinity Evensong one evening. The Trinity Evensong is an hour later than the one at King's, which is why he was able to go. We were discussing how singing requires a certain kind of feeling. It is a full-body experience, and in order to produce the best kind of music, you must internalize it first. As we walked through the double-door entrance to the Trinity courtyard on the way to chapel, he said, "You know, walking into this place, I feel good." It is no wonder that within the confines of such buildings and the greenest kind of grass, there exists such an enriched musical culture. What is even more aged than the architecture itself, though, is the music that fills it. Listening to these choirs sing is a special privilege because of the history associated with them and the legacies they carry. And with these legacies comes an expectation. I believe these choirs will continue to develop as a new generation rises to replace its former. What is so refreshing about these choirs is their ability to create new sounds and break through boundaries while clinging to such a long-standing musical tradition. Attending choral evensong with any of the choirs I have mentioned consists of hearing the past, listening to the present, and anticipating the future. As for the differences in British and American collegiate choirs, I believe they are important to understanding each unique culture. To provide a contrast to the quintessential English choral elements which I have mentioned, we need only look to the most influential figure of American choral music in the 20th century, Robert Shaw. One of Shaw's unique characteristics was his belief in the integrity of each individual note. I believe his chorale sang entirely on the voice, meaning they sang as individuals, and their blend was achieved primarily through vowel unification. Shaw arranged and recorded a series of American folk music with his chorale to set the standard for folk arrangements today. To demonstrate this unapologetic American sound, we'll be singing My Old Kentucky Home, one of the pieces that Shaw arranged in this series. And develop a new method to producing a healthier tone. Despite whether we sing in a secular or sacred setting, or whether or not a choir sings pure diction or with diphthongs, we need to remember that the human voice is the same across the world and all singers have the same needs. I discovered that music research requires approaching the makeup of society and a study of culture in addition to the art itself. To become refined musicians, we cannot hide behind our musical scores. Rather, we must develop an understanding of society and how our music plays a role. I'm thankful to have gained a deeper understanding of choral singing in another corner of the world. We have so much to learn from other countries and also so much to contribute as a country with a unique perspective. The unique elements that make up a good British choir, which I have shared with you, stem from tradition as well as culture. In the words of Timothy Day, English style was shaped by characteristic predilection for understatement and self-control. These choirs have mastered the art of self-control through their disciplined styles of singing, and I believe that singers incorporate understatement of resonance into their choral singing, which ultimately produces the most pure sound. The choral tone I observed at Cambridge does not require complicated conducting styles or extraneous resonance to reach the listener. Knowledge of its inspirational history and its overall purity are enough to affect anyone. I find it fitting to conclude with a quote from the great Hubert Parry, who, in his music, strove to represent the essential sanity of English genius, its mixture of strength and tenderness, its entire freedom from vanity and affectation. This quote is a reflection of the unique tradition and collective nature of the British choral tone, which choirs at Cambridge continue to uphold. Parry wrote a set of 6 anthems entitled Songs of Farewell in 1918, which are said to be his last compositions as a resignation to his terminal illness. Parry received his PhD from Cambridge in 1883, and his output of choral works is significant to the repertoire of choirs around the world. We will close with a piece from the first piece of this set called My Soul, There Is a Country.